The medical bay's sterile air tasted wrong to me. Too clean, too sharp, like someone had scrubbed away every molecule that might contain actual life. I stood there, all four of my sensory stalks twitching independently, as I watched the trauma team wheel in what they claimed was a human. Though honestly, it looked more like something you'd scrape off a hull after a bad jump through contested space. My name's Kethrix, senior xenobiologist aboard the CSS Mercy's Reach, and I'd been doing this job for 23 cycles. 23 cycles of cataloging species, treating injuries, and generally keeping the galaxy's more fragile life forms from falling apart at inconvenient moments. I thought I'd seen everything. I once treated a Glorbian whose entire skeletal structure had temporarily phased into the fourth dimension. Don't ask me how. Even they couldn't explain it. But this was about to rewrite my entire understanding of biological possibility. The human designated as Corporal Darius Webb, according to the transport manifest, had been pulled from a derelict mining station in the outer Gaina sector. The initial report said minimal life signs, which in medical parlance usually means start preparing the death rites. Our emergency responder, a perpetually anxious Tillix named Varun, had nearly refused to bring the body aboard, convinced it was already deceased. Kethrix, the readings don't make sense, Varun chittered, his carapace clicking nervously as he transferred the human onto our primary scanning table. The portable scanner kept giving me error messages. I thought the equipment was malfunctioning. I flexed my primary manipulators dismissively. Varun, you think the equipment is malfunctioning when you get a bruise? Let's just run the standard trauma protocol. The words died in my throat. Well, in my primary speaking sac, technically. As our lead diagnostician, Jara, activated the full-body medical scanner, the holographic display flickered to life above the table, and every single member of my medical team went completely, utterly silent. That can't be right, Zara whispered, her gill slits fluttering rakedly in what I recognized as profound distress. Run it again. Triple-check the calibration. Now I need you to understand something about galactic standard medical scanners. They're designed to analyze thousands of known stages, map internal structures down to the cellular level, and identify injuries, diseases, or anomalies with 99.7% accuracy. They don't make mistakes. They especially don't make mistakes that cause an entire trauma team of seasoned medical professionals to stand there gaping like newly hatched younglings who've just discovered what gravity does. The scan results scrolled past in that distinctive blue-green light, and with each new readout, I felt my understanding of biology crumbling like a sandcastle in a neutron storm. Blood pressure 120/80. Our junior medic Prill read out, her voice climbing toward hysteria. That's double what should be survivable for a carbon-based life form of this mass. The vascular system should be rupturing. The organs should be shutting down from the pressure differential alone. But that wasn't even the interesting part. Oh no, that was just the appetizer in this feast of biological impossibility. Heart rate 58 beats per minute, Zara continued, her manipulators trembling as she expanded the cardiovascular display. With that blood pressure, the cardiac muscle should be tearing itself apart. The energy expenditure alone should have exhausted cellular ATP reserves hours ago. And look at this. Look at the muscle fiber density surrounding the heart. It's nearly 3 times denser than any comparable species we've cataloged. I moved closer to the display, my sensory stalks extending fully to take in every detail. The human's Farziguesiquer system looked less like a biological structure and more like something you'd find in a high-performance combat vessel. Redundant pathways, reinforced chambers, a pumping mechanism that operated with the kind of brutal efficiency that made our own circulatory systems look like prototype sketches drawn by a particularly unimaginative student. Scan the skeletal structure, I ordered, my voice steadier than I felt. The display shifted, and I heard Varun make a sound I'd never heard him make before, a sort of strangled wheeze that suggested his respiratory system had briefly forgotten how to function. The human's bones glowed in the holographic display like support beams in a starship's superstructure. But unlike any support beams I'd ever seen, these were alive, actively regenerating and dense enough to deflect small arms fire according to the scanner's density analysis. Calcium hydroxyapatite composite, I muttered, reading the molecular breakdown. But the density? Zara, what's the comparative analysis showing? She worked her console silently for a moment, then looked up at me with all three of her primary eyes wide with something between awe and terror. Kethrix, the structural integrity rating is, it's equivalent to reinforced durasteel. Not similar to, equivalent. This creature's bones could survive impacts that would liquefy most species. And there's something else. See, these microscopic channels running through the skeletal matrix. They're not just for marrow distribution. They're actively producing something the scanner can't fully identify. But the preliminary analysis suggests it's flooding the bloodstream with combat enhancement compounds. You're telling me this thing's skeleton is a pharmaceutical factory? Prill asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Not just pharmaceutical, I corrected, zooming in on the cellular structure. Look at the regeneration rate. Those microfractures along the femur, probably from the accident that landed him here, they're already showing active repair. The osteoblast activity is by the void. It's operating at nearly 40 times the rate we'd expect. This species doesn't just heal, it actively reinforces injury sites, making them stronger than they were before. I stepped back from the console, trying to process what I was seeing. In my 23 cycles of xenobiology, I'd never encountered anything remotely like this. The Crenuri had excellent healing factors, sure, but even they took weeks to repair major skeletal damage. The Vorath could regrow lost limbs, but their bones were relatively fragile to begin with, designed for their low-gravity homeworld. This was something else entirely. Respiratory system, Jera called out, already pulling up the next scan before I could order it. Oh, ancestors preserve us. The human's lungs appeared on the display, and they looked almost insulting in their complexity. Where most species had simple gas exchange organs, air goes in, oxygen gets absorbed, waste gases go out. These were active, aggressive, almost militant in their design. Alveolar density is off the charts. Zara continued, her voice taking on that clinical detachment we all used when faced with data that threatened to overwhelm us. The surface area for gas exchange it has to be a mistake. This can't be right. What's the number? I demanded. 70 square meters. For a being that's less than 2 meters tall, she paused, manipulators dancing across her console. For comparison, a being this size should have maybe 15 square meters of lung surface area. This human has nearly 5 times that. And look at the supporting musculature. The diaphragm alone has more muscle fibers than most species have in their entire thoracic cavity. Prill pulled up a respiratory efficiency comparison, and I watched the numbers scroll past with growing disbelief. The oxygen extraction rate is 97%. Most species are happy with 70. This thing could survive on worlds where the atmospheric oxygen content would leave the rest of us gasping and brain damaged. But here's where it got really interesting, and by interesting I mean absolutely terrifying. Pull up the brain scan, I ordered quietly. Zara hesitated. Kethrix, are you sure? The preliminary readings were unusual. Do it. The holographic display shifted once more, and there it was, the human brain in all its overcomplicated, energy-hungry glory. It sat there in the cranial vault like a piece of military hardware someone had decided to build out of neural tissue instead of titanium alloy. Cerebral cortex thickness, comparative neuron density, synaptic connection patterns. I read off the data, my voice growing quieter with each specification. This is a weapon. This entire organ is designed as a tactical processing unit. The energy consumption is staggering, Zara added, highlighting the metabolic activity. Even in this unconscious state, the brain is using 20% of the body's total oxygen supply. When active, the glucose demands must be. Kethrix, how does this creature even maintain consciousness? The caloric requirements alone should make sustained cognitive function impossible. I pulled up the digestive system scan, and there was my answer, a metabolic furnace that could process nearly anything organic into usable energy, backed by a liver that was essentially a biological chemical warfare plant, filtering toxins that would kill most species while simultaneously producing compounds that enhanced everything from neural function to muscle performance. "Look at this," Varun said suddenly, pointing at a section of the scan we'd initially dismissed. "The immune response system. I thought the scanner was showing damage, but these aren't injuries, they're active defensive cells. Millions of them. Just patrolling. Constantly." He was right, the human's bloodstream was less a circulatory system and more a heavily armed patrol route, with white blood cells moving through it like security forces through a space station, constantly vigilant, constantly ready to respond to threats with overwhelming force. "There are at least 15 different types of immune cells here," I observed, cataloging them mentally. "Most species have 5, maybe 6, and the response time. Zara, simulate an introduction of standard bacterial pathogen. Use something common, maybe Streptococcus variant 7. She ran the simulation, and we all watched as the virtual pathogen was introduced into the human's bloodstream. The response was instantaneous and brutal. Within seconds, specialized cells had identified, surrounded, and destroyed the invader, while other cells were already adapting, creating targeted antibodies that would remain in the system for years, ready to recognize and eliminate that specific threat if it ever appeared again. "It's learning," Prill breathed. "The immune system is actively learning and adapting." "Now simulate something more aggressive," I said, my scientific curiosity overriding my growing unease. "Vortaxian blood plague." This was the test. Vortaxian blood plague was universally fatal to 98% of known species, a hemorrhagic nightmare that turned victims into biological meltdowns within hours. We used it as a benchmark for the absolute worst-case scenarios in pandemic preparedness. The simulation ran. The human immune system looked at the Vortaxian blood plague the way a battlecruiser might look at a child's toy spaceship, identified it as a threat, and systematically dismantled it with such efficiency that the scanner had trouble keeping up with the cellular response cascade. Within the simulated time frame, not only was the plague defeated, but the human body had already developed permanent immunity and was storing the defensive protocols in specialized memory cells. That's not possible," Zara whispered. "Nothing survives Vortaxian blood plague. Humans do, apparently," I replied, my mind's racing through implications. "What else are we missing?" We spent the next hour scanning every system, every organ, every cellular structure we could identify, and with each new discovery, the picture became clearer and more disturbing. The muscular system wasn't just strong, it was adaptive, capable of rapid hypertrophy in response to stress, building itself bigger and more powerful with each challenge. The endocrine system was a chemical orchestra, producing hormones that regulated everything from aggression to healing, capable of flooding the body with adrenaline that would literally shut down pain receptors and unlock reserves of strength that physics suggested shouldn't exist in a frame this size. And then, Varun found the redundancies. "Kethrix," he said quietly, pulling up a full system integration scan. "This creature has backup systems for everything." He walked us through it, and I felt my certainty about the universe crumbling with each revelation. 2 kidneys when one would suffice. 2 lungs, independently capable of sustaining life. A liver that could function at a fraction of its size. A brain with enough redundancy that damage to significant portions wouldn't necessarily be fatal. Even the blood supply had multiple routing options, capable of redirecting flow around damaged areas automatically. "It's designed to survive," I said slowly. Understanding dawning. Not just survive, to keep fighting even after sustaining damage that should be catastrophic. This isn't evolution for peaceful existence. This is evolution for war. "Environmental adaptation analysis," Zara said suddenly, her manipulators moving rapidly across the console. "I want to see what conditions this species evolved under." The scanner hummed, processing data, and then delivered results that made our previous discoveries seem almost reasonable by comparison. "Gravity tolerance. 1.3 times standard," Prill read, her voice flat with shock. "This thing evolved on a high-gravity world. That explains the bone density, the muscular development, But the atmospheric composition analysis suggests an oxygen-rich environment with significant seasonal variation, exposure to high levels of solar radiation, and, she paused, double-checking the readout. Temperature fluctuation ranging from -40 to +50 degrees standard scale in the same seasonal cycle. I felt my sensory stalks curl inward, an involuntary response to stress. You're telling me this species evolved on a world that actively tried to kill them, constantly? Not just that, Zara added, pulling up comparative evolutionary data. Look at the timeline estimates based on cellular aging markers and genetic complexity. This species went from basic tool use to spaceflight capability in less than 12,000 cycles. For comparison, the Crinare took 40,000. The Tilix took 60. We took 52,000 cycles, and we considered ourselves evolutionarily rapid. The implications hung in the sterile air like a physical presence. Humans didn't just survive their nightmare homeworld, they conquered it in a cosmological eye blink, then decided that wasn't enough and started expanding into an even more hostile environment, the void itself. What's the cognitive assessment showing? I asked, almost afraid of the answer. Zara pulled up the neural mapping data, and her gill slits went completely still, never a good sign. Pattern recognition capability is exceptional. Problem-solving architecture suggests multiple parallel processing streams. Abstract thinking capacity off the standard charts. But here's what's really interesting, Kethrix. The emotional regulation centers are significantly underdeveloped compared to the cognitive centers, meaning this species thinks incredibly well, adapts quickly, learns from experience, but their emotional responses aren't proportionally controlled. They're capable of acting on impulse, of making decisions based on anger, fear, and this is what concerns me, protective instinct. The scanner's detecting elevated neural pathway development in regions associated with pack bonding, social hierarchy, and defensive aggression toward perceived threats to group members. I pulled up the comparative psychology profiles we had on file for various spacefaring species. Most of us had evolved past extreme emotional responses. It was generally considered necessary for stable interstellar civilization. Excessive emotional volatility led to conflicts, and conflicts in space tended to be fatal for everyone involved. Humans, apparently, had skipped that particular evolutionary step and gone straight to the stars anyway, bringing their primal emotional architecture with them like a loaded weapon they couldn't quite put down. Run a combat capability assessment, I ordered. I need to know what we're actually dealing with here. The scanner processed for several long moments, longer than usual, which suggested the computational requirements were substantial. When the results appeared, I understood why. Threat response time, 0.23 seconds from stimulus to physical reaction. The scanner reported in its flat, emotionless voice. Estimated strike force with current muscle mass and skeletal leverage, sufficient to cause catastrophic structural damage to most known species. Estimated maximum sustainable exertion period under combat stress, 4 to 6 hours before mandatory rest period. Estimated recovery time from severe trauma, 72 to 96 hours for injuries that would be fatal to 83% of catalogued species. Varun made that strangled wheeze sound again. 4 to 6 hours of continuous combat? That's not a biological organism. That's a weapon system with digestive functions. There's more, Zara said quietly, highlighting a section of the neural scan. The brain shows evidence of what we'd call stress optimization. Under extreme pressure, instead of shutting down or freezing, neural efficiency actually increases. Time perception altered. Pain receptors can be voluntarily suppressed. Decision-making speeds up rather than degrades. It's like the entire nervous system was designed to function better during a crisis than during normal operation. I stared at the holographic display, at this impossible collection of biological systems that somehow coexisted in a single organism, and felt something I hadn't experienced in my entire professional career. Genuine fear of a patient. What about psychological warfare resistance? I asked, thinking of the various species who relied on psychic or pheromonal advantages in conflicts. The scanner analysis appeared, and I almost laughed at the absurdity. highly resistant to external mental influence. Strong sense of individual identity creates natural barrier against psychic intrusion. Pheromonal receptors present but subordinate to visual and auditory processing, can be influenced but not controlled through chemical means. Estimated susceptibility to standard psychological manipulation techniques, minimal to negligible. So the species was essentially immune to most of the non-physical combat techniques the galaxy relied on, and their physical combat capabilities were somewhere between terrifying and please make it stop. Check the genetic structure, I said, grasping for something, anything, that might be a weakness. There has to be some vulnerability we're missing. Some trade-off for all these advantages. Zara dove into the genetic analysis, and for a few moments I thought we might have found it. The human genome showed evidence of significant genetic variation, far more than most stable species, which usually indicated vulnerability to genetic disorders and hereditary diseases. But then the medical scanner provided context, and I realized we'd misunderstood again. The genetic variation isn't a weakness, Zara explained, her voice hollow. It's a feature. High genetic diversity means rapid adaptation to new environments, resistance to species-wide pathogens, and evolutionary flexibility. Most species stabilize their genome for consistency. Humans keep theirs chaotic for versatility. They're essentially gambling that the advantages of adaptability outweigh the risks of genetic disease. And does the gamble pay off? Prill asked. According to the health markers on this particular specimen, yes. Overwhelmingly, yes. There are some minor genetic predispositions, slightly elevated cardiovascular disease risk, some tendency toward inflammatory responses, but nothing that significantly impacts combat effectiveness or survival rates. For a species with this much genetic chaos, they're remarkably healthy. I turned away from the console, my mind's trying to process everything we'd discovered. In the span of one medical scan, we'd uncovered a species that was essentially a biological war machine, evolved on a hell world, equipped with redundant systems, adaptive responses, and an emotional architecture that made them fiercely protective of their social groups, while simultaneously capable of sustained, brutal violence toward perceived threats. And then Corporal Darius Webb woke up. The change in his vital signs was immediate and dramatic. Heart rate spiked to 120. Blood pressure jumped, neural activity went from minimal to fully active in less than a second. His eyes, those predator-forward eyes designed for binocular vision and precise targeting, snapped open, and I watched as they rapidly scanned the medical bay, assessing threats, calculating distances, identifying exits. Where? His voice was rough, damaged probably from whatever trauma had put him on that derelict station. Where am I? I raised my primary manipulators in what I hoped was a calming gesture, trying to ignore the fact that I was standing next to a creature who could literally tear me apart if he decided I was a threat. Corporal Webb, you're aboard the CSS Mercy's Reach. You were found on a derelict mining station in the outer Gaina sector. You're safe. His eyes, I noticed they were a startling blue, unusual coloration by any standard, fixed on me with an intensity that made my sensory stalks want to retract into my carapace. The others? The mining crew? We found only you, I said gently. I'm sorry. Something flickered across his face. Pain, grief, anger, all cycling through in rapid succession. The emotional transparency was almost shocking. Most species had learned to mask their feelings better. But then I remembered the neural scan, the underdeveloped emotional regulation centers, and understood. This was a being who felt deeply and showed it openly, whether he wanted to or not. How long was I out there? He asked, trying to sit up despite the medical restraints, which I noted with alarm, were already beginning to strain under the pressure he was applying without apparent effort. Approximately 48 hours. Based on the condition of the station when we found you, Zara answered, moving to release the restraints before he broke them. You sustained significant trauma, multiple lacerations, contusions, what appeared to be second-degree radiation burns, and probable concussion. Webb looked down at himself, at the biogel bandages covering various wounds, and I watched his face shift into an expression I couldn't quite identify. I've had worse. He'd had worse. This creature, who'd survived injuries that would have killed most species outright, was casually dismissing them as moderate inconveniences. "Corporal, I need to ask you some questions," I said, my scientific curiosity temporarily overriding my survival instincts. "For our medical records, your species, humans, we don't have extensive data on your biology. The scans we've run have been illuminating, but I'd like to understand more about your capabilities." Webb swung his legs off the medical table, wincing slightly, the first sign of pain I'd seen from him, and looked at me with what might have been amusement.
"You scanned me and freaked out, didn't you?"
"Yeah, that happens. What do you want to know?" "The healing rate we're seeing," I began. "Is this normal for your species?" "Pretty much. Give me a week, maybe less, and most of this'll be gone. Bones take longer if they're broken, but even then, we're talking weeks, not months." He rotated his shoulder experimentally, testing the range of motion. "Humans are pretty hard to keep down. It's kind of our thing." "Your thing," I repeated slowly. "Corporal, do you understand what we found in your medical scan? The redundancies, the adaptive systems, the combat optimization." "Yeah, we're built tough," Webb interrupted, standing up fully now, and I was struck by how effortlessly he moved despite the injuries, despite 48 hours of unconsciousness. Earth wasn't exactly a gentle mother, if you know what I mean. Everything there wanted to kill us: the weather, the animals, the plants, the bacteria, sometimes even the dirt if you weren't careful. You either evolved to survive that, or you didn't make it. We made it. Varun, who'd been silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke up. But the emotional responses, the aggressive, protective instincts, the fact that we care about each other, and we're willing to fight for the people we consider ours. Webb's voice had taken on an edge, and I saw his posture shift subtly. Not aggressive, exactly, but alert. Ready. "Yeah, that's human too. You want to know what really makes us dangerous? It's not the bone density or the healing factor or any of that physical stuff." He paused, and I realized everyone in the medical bay was hanging on his words. "It's that we don't quit. Ever. You hurt one of us. We remember. You threaten our people. We don't run calculations about acceptable losses or optimal survival strategies. We come for you, and we keep coming, and we don't stop until either you're no longer a threat or we're dead. And even then, if you killed one of us, there's a dozen more right behind ready to finish what we started. That's what 20,000 years of surviving on Earth taught us. You don't back down. You don't give up, and you never ever leave your people behind." He looked directly at me, and I saw in his eyes something that made evolutionary sense for the first time. This wasn't a species that had evolved for peace or cooperation with the universe at large. This was a species that had evolved to survive against impossible odds, to protect their own at any cost, to face extinction and spit in its face. "The mining crew," Webb continued, his voice quieter now but somehow more intense. "They were my people. I was supposed to protect them. I failed." The pain in his voice was almost physical. "But I'm guessing whatever hit that station is still out there, and now I've got a new people to protect, the ones who pulled me out of that mess." "You said this is the CSS Mercy's Reach?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Medical vessel, right? Non-combatant?" He looked around at our team, at our distinctly unmilitary medical bay. "You should probably increase your security protocols. Whatever attacked that mining station, it wasn't natural, and it wasn't random. Somebody's hunting in this sector." The casual way he delivered that threat assessment, the automatic shift into protective mode for beings he'd known for all of 5 minutes, the complete absence of self-preservation in favor of group survival. All of it confirmed everything the medical scans had told us. Humans weren't just physically exceptional. They were psychologically hardwired to be the galaxy's most terrifying protectors and most relentless avengers. We'll inform the captain," I managed, my mind's already racing through the implications. If Webb was right, if something was hunting in this sector, having a human aboard might be the difference between survival and becoming another derelict. Webb nodded, satisfied, and then looked down at himself again. "You got any spare clothes? And maybe something to eat?" I'm absolutely starving. Survival mode burns through calories like you wouldn't believe. Of course it did. Of course, this walking biological weapons platform needed massive caloric intake to fuel its impossible systems. As Prill hurried off to find food and clothing, I looked at my medical team, at their expressions of awe and fear and fascination. We'd all come into this medical bay thinking we'd be treating a dying alien. Instead, we'd discovered a species that redefined what biological life could achieve, what evolution could produce when a world decided to forge its inhabitants in the fires of constant, relentless adversity. And now one of them was on our ship, already planning how to protect us from threats we didn't even know existed yet. I pulled up the medical scan one more time, looking at all those impossible systems, all those biological miracles, and realized something that made me laugh despite myself, a sound that made Webb look at me curiously. "What's funny?" he asked. "Nothing," I said, my sensory stalks curling in what my species considered a smile. I was just thinking that in 23 cycles of xenobiology, I thought I'd seen everything. Clearly, I was wrong. Webb grinned. A predator's expression on a predator's face, softened somehow by genuine warmth. "Stick with me, Doc. Humans have a way of being full of surprises, usually the kind that involve explosions or improbable victories. But surprises nonetheless." As he walked out of the medical bay, moving with that efficient, dangerous grace that spoke of a species born for conflict but choosing cooperation, I made a note in my personal log: first contact with human specimen, recommend immediate upgrade to galactic threat assessment protocols, and simultaneous petition for alliance status. Species designation, apex survivors. Potential tactical value immeasurable. Potential danger if provoked, catastrophic. Recommendation: make friends with these creatures immediately and never, under any circumstances, threaten anything they consider theirs. And then, because I was still a scientist at heart, I added one final note. Request permission to write comprehensive xenobiology paper on human physiology. Estimated length, several volumes. Estimated time to completion, rest of my natural life. Estimated impact on galactic medical science, revolutionary. Somewhere in the corridor outside, I heard Webb laugh at something Prill had said, that distinctly human sound of genuine amusement, and I realized that one medical scan hadn't just shocked our team, it had changed everything we thought we knew about what biological life could become when pushed to its absolute limits, and forced to evolve or die. Humans chose to evolve. The galaxy would never be the same.